everyone, and welcome to Life in the Wildlands podcast, where we discuss exciting opportunities with outdoor careers, share professional experiences, and provide advice to overcome the hurdles to federal employment. I'm your host, Becky Schufelt, and today we have Moose Mutlow, a senior project director in Yosemite National Park in California, and he's going to share how he started his career working in search and rescue, swiftwater rescue, and serving as a family liaison. Thank you for joining us today, Moose. So go ahead and tell us more about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me, Becky. I've been working in American national parks since the year 2000, primarily for nonprofits involved in environmental education. And as part of that setup, which NatureBridge is a senior education partner with the National Park Service, I can step out of that role and be given to the park to fulfill certain roles within largely search and rescue. So I do everything from helping to coordinate and train the swiftwater rescue and recovery team for Yosemite Search and Rescue, through to being a national trainer to teach modules of search and rescue curriculum in around other national park units.
Oh, that sounds like a very interesting job. So I definitely want to know more. How did you get your start with the Park Service and in this field of work?
I ended up coming from a background in outdoor education, doing a lot of guiding and working with wilderness expedition programs around the world. I'd spent time in Europe, Australia, and Southern Africa, and I'd come backwards and forwards to the United States, mainly working on the East Coast. And in 2000, I made the shift out west and started working in the Olympic National Park. And you start to build connections. And out of that, people start to give you opportunities. So the thing I loved about the national park, it's like a university in a lot of ways. It's if you're a motivated learner, you can find opportunity, and it might not pay off in the most immediate sense. You might be on that AD hire of $17.50 to do something very dangerous. But in the long term, that starts to build out your experience base to actually get to a point where you have a higher value and get more involved in detailed assignments.
So, Moose, you just mentioned an AD. Can you explain to me what that is in a little more detail?
So for people like me who work outside of the federal government, I'm not a term employee, permanent or on a seasonal position. It's the mechanism whereby if there's an emergency like a fire or search and rescue, the Park Service can make an immediate hire. You've done all your paperwork beforehand, and you could be slotted into an operation at very short notice. And there are some limits to how much you can be hired through the year and in what role. But essentially, it's a way of maximizing your response resources without necessarily having delay upon delay of certs or background checks, because those things will happen on the front end.
So you don't have to essentially be an agency employee, with like the Forest Service, the Park Service to be an AD.
Right.
It's kind of like a casual hire, if that's how I understand it.
Yeah,
And
and that critically is a really important part. A lot of people think you have to have the permanent, temporary, or term positions in order to work with the Park Service. And an AD, particularly in fire season, is a really good example of where there's a lot of AD hiring. If you've got your red card and you've got your necessary modules and task books done, you're in a very hireable position. In terms of longevity within the service, it builds that depth of experience that allows you to have genuine experience to compete for a permanent position.
yeah, it sounds that like those types of positions are really important in trying to fill some of the gaps within the agencies themselves, since they don't have all the resources necessarily that they need to accomplish mission critical work.
And for me, one of the jobs I fulfill as a trainer and as a technician is a family liaison officer, which is the incident commander representative when there's a big incident with a fatality or an MCI, where you have a need to liaise with an affected family or group of friends. And that's something that can be farmed out pretty easily on an AD hire to bring in professionals, whether they're a mental health background or they have a depth of experience in the Park Service to understand the nuances of search and rescue. That's a place we look to build our cadre of responders.
And I feel it's such important work And I'm sure there's not a lot of qualified people out there that can do the family liaison work. And, it's not necessarily anything glamorous, but it really does make a difference when there's a fatality or in, a major event where there is some injury, and making those connections with the family to let them know that the agency does care. And I know from just what I've seen, my husband had kind of played a little bit a part in not the family liaison stuff, but more with the critical incident debriefing with wildland fire after fatalities. And providing that support is extremely important. And I want to know how you got into that to become one of a family liaison and provide that critical support.
So I have a background in formal education, some social work, and within communication and personal development. So I had the communication skill base to be able to recognize how to work with people in crisis. And on top of that, I have a comfort with finding the ways to allow silence to sit there and be really effective, and also to really listen to what people are saying and try to figure out how to best answer those pieces. And the reason I got involved was somewhat by luck. Is I had a colleague at the office who went to a training for family liaison and said they were going to go, and literally said, "Hey, I think you'd be good at that." And I went to a half-day program. It lined up with stuff I'd done in the past with other organizations. And so I came in with a slightly elevated level of experience, and I slotted into the program within, I want to say, less than a couple of months. I was out on calls.
So I know that you've done the family liaison. We've talked about that, and you've also have a lot of experience working in search and rescue and swiftwater rescue trainings as well. Is there a story or two that you'd like to share that really just kind of pulled you into this line of work, that really helped you feel like this was all worth it and this is what I need to do, and why it is that you chose to continue on with this type of career field?
The thing I love about search and rescue is that everybody's focused on the same thing in one moment. You might be figuring out the air search, and you might be figuring out resources with vehicles, and you might be figuring out a grid search with a hasty team. But at that moment, you're all focused on that one thing, and everything else falls away. So all the pettiness, the infighting to get decisions done within organizations, typically, it isn't present because you're focused in the moment on supporting people. And I love that because it keeps me grounded in a world that's can get really complex and harried, and you realize you're hurrying over something that really doesn't need to be hurried over. Being on search and rescue or responding to people in crisis, it's immediate and it's obvious, and you can see the benefit for them and for the operation pretty quickly. And ultimately, it's selflessness. I think in a culture that's very focused on individual perception or branding, I like the cleanness of looking way beyond yourself to other people's need. That's what keeps me coming back, and it's addictive. It the excitement that you can have in a search or in a swift water context. I love being in the water. I love being around the water, and if you can take those skills to help other people or to resolve part of the puzzle of a disappearance, that makes it even more meaningful.
I mean, I myself go out on fires or wildland fires as an AD and as a public information officer. And what keeps me coming back is knowing that I'm there to help a community. I may not have direct, contact with them necessarily, but to have that, like you said, that sense of selflessness and taking something that you love to do and make it meaningful in a way that helps, to the community or individual, I think is really important work. And I think a lot of people don't understand or realize that there are jobs out there that are meaningful, that are completely obtainable, especially in our line of work. And I guess that's the point too of this podcast, is to really help get those messages and explain what those jobs are, and why people like us keep coming back and doing this, because We don't do it for the money. It's not anywhere close to why anybody does this in these types of fields. So I think it's really important for our audience to know that.
And I think that point of there are all these opportunities. I think sometimes when you're looking to volunteer or step into something, you're looking for excitement or this fulfillment of this thing that's different. And actually, where you can best contribute is by doing the thing you do well. We had a guy on the search and rescue team who had the most analytical mind. Gary was fantastic at logistics. If you want logistics chief, you want Gary. And he could line buses up, he could line food up, and he could do everything. And he knew he was really good at that, and he was a really important part of the team. And he felt fulfilled because we never ever struggled with that logistical role. That was like, it's not a sexy role. It's not a role you look at and go, "Ooh, I want to do that one necessarily." But he played to his strength, and as a result, we were all successful. I think there's beauty in that simplistic piece, is to have everybody's part counts, because you can't have the hero on the end of the rope swinging into the cliff face without a bunch of people lugging a lot of rope in to the top of El Cap and dropping 2,500 feet of rope off the edge. And it's a team. It's all about that being a small cog in a much larger operation. I think the beauty of working in the park system is the craziness of the assignments you can go on. I have worked on diplomatic missions where somebody said, "Hey, we've got this mission in right now. Can you come and talk to them about education?" And then I ended up wandering up the trail, and we saw a bear that had been anesthetized, and they were working it with a collar, and we started talking about bear management. And then those things morph into other opportunities. I think if you look at the service, whether it's the park, BLM, or the Forest Service, as further university, and you seek out learning opportunity, then you'll never be bored. It's if you get too content in that position and then you start to feel a bit complacent, a little upset about what you're doing, there's just so much opportunity out there. I ended up on the bear management team at one point, and we had a bear that died swimming the river, and we decided I had to swim on it to try and get the GPS collar off it. And it was all well and good. I got all my gear on, I got my snorkel on, I got behind this carcass. I had this big bubble train coming off it in a white water situation. I got down in the water. I got all geared up to dive on this big carcass, and then realized it wasn't air bubbles. It was bear grease coming off the back end of the bear. And I was covered from head to foot in this sort of decomposing vat of bear oil. And
Goodness.
it sounds hideous, but it's crazy. It's like the stuff that you end up doing if you say yes. If you open yourself up to say yes, these things add up over time to something that is, your career becomes a series of adventures and stories. And in a landscape in which stories are being smushed into 10 or 15-second TikTok videos or Instagram posts, these are stories that have depth, they have meaning, and they have value way beyond that digital flash in the pan. Because these are the stories that sit within your soul, and they make your heart race, and they make you sing with laughter because it's just crazy, and they stir real emotion. They take you to highs and lows. You live a life. That's the beauty of a career within these agencies. You can really live a life.
And in the moment too, like just some of those experiences that, just like you said, you keep saying it's about being in the moment and being selfless. But I want to know, Moose, how have all these experiences really impacted you and your person over time?
I think they've reinforced my belief in the value of the natural world, and the fact that you can either stand on the side and watch it disappear, or you can fight for it and figure out a way to change the world on your personal level, and then how to contribute to the greater good. And it's put me in a healthy position because I'm outside a lot, and I embrace that opportunity, and I'm part of something bigger. I think the modern world can be very lonely, and you can feel very isolated. And actually, there's community in a shared mission and value. And that has even more value today, because the only way we're going to solve the problems of the world, particularly on an environmental level, on a social level, is by working together. And nature is that model. Nature is the thing that shows how systems are self-supporting and influenced others around them and figure out how to find balance. That's how it maybe doesn't change me as much now. It reinforces me on what's important.
The next question was, why do you feel like the work you do contributes to overland public land stewardship? Yeah.
So at its heart, I'm involved in education. So I'm the senior project director for a environmental ed program that's building a 224-bed facility in Yosemite National Park that will be a permanent home for education, a place for young people in one of the premier national parks in the world. And that's one of the places I think I'm really contributing, is one of the idea that if you create places for young, particularly young people, to interact within parks with the natural environment and other young people, you're actually building constituents. And constituents make decisions financially and economically. They make decisions by voting politically, and they make decisions on their behavior. If parks are totally disconnected from that group, why would they value them? Why would public lands be of value to someone if they've never experienced what that means and the range of what public lands are? It's whether it's the Arc in St. Louis or urbanized parks in Philadelphia, all the way to Alaska. How can you have value if you've never experienced it? And for too long, people have been excluded, and they need to be invited in, and they need to be encouraged and given places where they feel safe, and they can have defining experiences that they can reference back in their real lives, for want of a better term. We have to give them that golden moment, that green thread that ties them to the land, and realizes that they're not away from it, they're a part of it.
Exactly. So do you have any thoughts on how to tap into some of these underserved communities where we can get more of those folks out into our public lands to appreciate them and learn about them?
I think you have to listen to those communities. I think we need to be responsive to change and not see it as something scary. And I think we need to support programs like the University of California at Merced runs a Yosemite leadership program that pulls from participants from underserved communities, non-traditional communities for park users, and really helps craft the path for employment early on in a person's college career. I think we need to do more programs like Adventure Risk Challenge, which is another Sierra Nevada-based program that takes students from the Central Valley and pulls them up into the Sierra Nevada onto public lands, and then through academic and outdoor activity really starts to build out their core competencies within the classroom, and also gives them experience to reference back to when they go back to their home communities. We need to be creative, and we need to fund them. And it starts as much with being open and welcoming in the way that we greet people, we interact with people on the trail, through to talking to representatives or contributing to organizations that are trying to make a difference.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's where I want Life in the Wildlands to pursue. I want to see more folks and get them more exposed. And I guess that's part of purpose of this podcast, is to do that, but also trying to provide workshops and services that will help get these folks in the door, just trying to reach out into these communities to do that. So thank you for sharing that. I was just really curious from your viewpoint on what needs to happen. And I know I have my thoughts as well. Is there anything you feel really important to share with folks that are interested and want to pursue an outdoor career in this career field that you've pursued?
The first thing is, I think, do not be intimidated by the federal job application process. There's plenty of people out there like yourself, Becky, who can help give advice about how to go through a rather daunting process. And I'd say don't give up. Find advocates, find allies that can help you with that application process. The earlier you get in and the more base level experience you build, the more opportunities open up down the line. This isn't a career necessarily where you come in and you're earning $70,000 a year for your first job. I think it's a bit trite to say you'll be rewarded by sunsets, because they are fantastic, but that doesn't pay your college bill necessarily, or a commitment to your family. But there
Definitely
is
not.
something when you tackle it at a younger age where you have a bit more resilience to work with just the more outlandish opportunity. So if you took a seasonal gig at the Gates of the Arctic, which I think is the least visited national park system in the United States, you would have this amazing summer and you'd have to deal with polar bears and you'd have to deal with, you see caribou herds, you'd see all these amazing things. But that's a great way to start talking about what you did in your next interview. And there's still value in working on the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina and working on a saw crew out there and doing trail maintenance along the AT. That has value. I think all the time you should be thinking about, how do I create my myth? How do I create this thing that when people hear it, they're, oh, wow. And I look at it as a really ordinary thing because I'm just committed to personal growth and I'm committed to finding opportunities that continue to allow me to develop. And there's just so much out there. And it just takes resilience and it takes you asking for help sometimes. And it takes a bit of humility if it doesn't work out quite how you thought it was gonna, and draw a positive from that experience. Yeah, I think that would be my observation on that.
Thank you. And for our listeners out there, that's what Life in the Wildlands does, is we help provide those services that can help you get into these types of jobs, whatever your objective is, or maybe you don't even know, you just want to work outside. We provide career counseling and that can help you on your journey with that. Okay, Moose. So I know you've got a book. I wanted to give you an opportunity to put a plug in for it if you would like.
Thank you. I got a couple of books out. I have a guide for crisis communication for family liaison officers. It's just an idea about one of the systems that we use over on the West Coast. And that book's called When Accidents Happen. And it's for practitioners or somebody trying to get into the role as a guide. And then last year, as a COVID project, I wrote a book called Searching, which is a memoir about being on a search and rescue group and the impact of that role and the highs and the lows of it. And it's just a short book, and it's meant to just put into words maybe what people feel when you're hovering on that really fine balance between success and failure, finding somebody alive and then dealing with a fatality. And that has a cumulative effect. And part of what Searching does is look at that cumulative effect and the way it's changed me.
They sound like fascinating reads. Where can our listeners go to find those books?
Both of those are on Amazon. If you just put in Moose Mutlow, it'll come up on the author's page, or you can go to my website, www.moosemutlow.com, and there's a link to buy the book from there.
Is there anything else you'd like to share?
I just want to compliment you, Becky, on a fantastic mission for your organization. I'm really excited that there's somebody out there helping people work through the complications and challenges of the federal employment process. I'm really pleased that somebody's grabbed that and recognized the need. And I encourage everybody who listens to this to spread the word. Sometimes in advocacy, we forget that we might have been affected by something. We think something's really good, and we don't think to pass it on to somebody else. So I think Becky's work is one of those things I would pass on, not just to one person, but I pass on to two or three.
Oh, I appreciate that, Moose. I know I'm doing this to help, and I just see this lack of like newer blood coming into the agencies, and the agencies struggling to fill all the jobs that they have available now, especially with all this Great American Outdoors funding. And just in general, I think a lot of people are starting to retire. And so that creates a bunch of different vacancies. And it's almost like playing whack-a-mole with different people moving around, but not necessarily having enough new people come in to help fill some of the voids. So it is important, and that's the mission, trying to get more good folks in the door. And it's not necessarily an easy way. It's not easy to navigate, but that's why we're here, is to provide that assistance, because we know how to navigate those systems, and it's not as scary as people might think, and it's a lot more fun than people might think. This is some of the best jobs ever. You get to sit back and say, hey, I got paid to do that today. And I think if more people understood and knew, they would, want to pursue these types of careers as well. But not every day is watching sunsets and seeing National Geographic moments, but it definitely makes it worth it, the jobs. And like you said, having that sense of selflessness and being able to focus in the moment, I think are really important with connecting ourselves to our environment.
One of my favorite memories of being in a national park is in Olympic National Park and putting my wetsuit on, a mask, and just holding on to a rock in an ice cold river and having steelhead swim by me and pull up before a big jump, and having the chill of that water was so headache inducing, but I didn't want to go because there was magic in that silvery moment as that eye just coursed over you and then it flickered off into the shadow of this fish that's done this amazing journey. There are so many memories like that. And that's all that does is enrich your life.
It's what keeps us coming back. Okay, folks, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much, Moose, for sharing your stories and so much helpful information. It was really interesting to hear your stories of being in search and rescue and just your career with working in national parks. I really appreciated that. And thank you to our audience for listening in with us today. Stay tuned for next time. For more stories about outdoor careers, subscribe to the Life in the Wildlands podcast, where I will be interviewing outdoor professionals to discover exciting opportunities in outdoor careers, share professional experiences, discuss the hurdles to federal employment, and provide advice on how to overcome these challenges. And if you're interested in outdoor jobs and don't know where to start, or if you already are a federal employee with an outdoor career that's struggling to make it to the next level in your career development, Life in the Wildlands can help you on your journey. Check out our career counseling and federal resume development services at www.lifeinthewildlands.com or call 406-848-1660.